Welcome to Fort Worth 148's podcast, where we meet to discuss Masonic topics and strive to build value in the brotherhood. The opinions and statements of the participants do not represent any positions or stance of any Grand Lodge or Lodge and are solely the viewpoints of the participants. Welcome back to the podcast, brothers. This is Rip Moore, past master and current secretary at Fort Worth 148.
This is Billy Hamilton, senior steward for 148.
And this is Gabe Yagish, Master Mason with Fort Worth 148.
Good to be back, boys.
Good to be back. So
Always.
You know, I got a quick question because I'm looking at this book I found the other day. Have you ever ran into, like, had gone to a bookstore or library or something, and just some random book jumps out to you and says, "You got to read me"?
sometimes, yeah. What'd you find?
Yep.
Booker T. Washington's autobiography, and it is legit.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm like 60 pages in now, and it's like a book printed in 1901, but it's awesome.
Okay, see, now
And
I
I
feel
love
bad.
that feeling.
Because for a second, I feel really dumb. Because you said Booker T. Washington, an autobiography, and my first thought was like, wow, yeah, like WCW wrestler Booker T. Like, I had no idea he wrote a biography. And then I realized you were talking about Booker T. Washington, the historical figure. You know, and I went, oh, yeah, no, not all life is about wrestling. Okay.
Not all live. I know exactly what you're talking about, the Spinneroonie.
Exactly. Wrong Booker T. So, for any of you listeners who aren't aware, I'm not the sharpest spoon in the knife drawer. So, today's episode is Masonic Funerals 101, How, What, and Why. And so, it's not a hugely in-depth episode. It's going to be more of a practical approach to the subject than a historical one. It's more of like how to get a Masonic funeral and what a Masonic funeral is and why you should have one, that kind of thing. Standard disclaimer applies. This is going to vary wildly according from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. All material that we are presenting to here today, unless otherwise specified, is based off of the Grand Lodge of Texas AF and AM monitor rituals, what have you. So, for any of you listeners that are listening going, what the hell are they talking about? It's maybe because you're not from our jurisdiction, and that's okay. So.
Yeah, they're still awesome, though. They're my favorite.
So... But I figured we can
stuff.
jump in with some discussion questions. The first question that we have is not too hard. It's from Brother Matthew J. Matty, or Matty, I don't know, in Texas Freemasons Facebook group. Hey, gents, I was raised to Master Mason at Oklahoma City Lodge 36, and my home secretary has forwarded a letter of good standing to White Rock Lodge in Texas so I can affiliate. I understand that I would then pay dues in Texas, but here's my query. I am perpetual, or endowed, in Oklahoma Scottish Rite and the Grand Lodge of Oklahoma. Is that option available to me in Texas? Thank you in advance for your wisdom. Answer is yes, you can become perpetual in Texas. We don't call it that. We just call it being endowed.
Right.
So, you know, minimum for that is $500, and it'll vary according from lodge to lodge. I had a question based off of that. What is a life member, and how are they different from an endowed member?
Life members are granted, if I'm not mistaken, maybe they are exempt from Grand Lodge dues, but you can give a life member, I think, every 2 years. Boy, I'm sketchy because they just don't happen anymore. But it's something like that. You can give them away every 2 years, and it relieves them of dues. But I think you still paid per capita on them to Grand Lodge.
So I have a follow-up question to that. I understand that if you have a ritual certificate of proficiency for a set number of years, aren't you also usually exempt from dues?
Ooh.
Exempt from what?
I thought he was like a 25-year like ritual proficiency holder would.
No, you. The only thing you get for a 25-year certificate is just that, a certificate. You never have to
Okay.
take the examination again.
Oh,
Because
okay.
as a certificate holder, you have to take it like the first year, you have to go retake it again the next year, and then you don't have to go back again for 3 years, although that's not
Hmm.
recommended, until you get to 25. And if you stay consecutive, then you get a life membership, and they say you got it. You don't have to come back and keep checking.
Okay, so that was a misunderstanding on my part because I thought that that meant, you were a life member of the lodge.
No, yeah, because you don't get any special like title like that, because that all pertains to dues. Life
Okay.
member and endowed, 50-year member. But if you get a 25-year certificate, it won't be for esoteric work. It won't be anywhere on your dues.
Now, some lodges have traditions of granting, or not granting, but buying endowments for members that achieve certain levels of certificates. So, like somebody that gets a 25-year certificate for the work, their lodge might buy them one or something like that. But
Yeah, and
there's
Okay.
nothing. There's
the
nothing on the
life
Grand Lodge side.
the life membership used to be like a big reward if you got granted here's an award for you. You don't pay dues, which is awesome. But it went away when the endowment came about.
Yeah.
I didn't say it went away. It's still in Grand Lodge law. It's still an option, but it just fell out of habit, I should say.
So the next question I had, there's one of us that can answer it fairly well. But I got asked this, and I said, well, honestly, I'm not the best person to ask because I'm not actually in it. Question is, what the heck is Grotto, and what do you do? Billy?
Okay. Um, that's funny. It reminds me of, what is your father and what does he do? Or who is your father? So, Grotto is it's another appendant body. It was started. Uh, the shrine came first, but the Grotto was started with a similar mission, and that it was supposed to be a playground for master masons, right? Because in Blue Lodge, you're supposed to be very serious. You do a lot of serious work, and so both the shrine and the grotto were formed with the intention of, hey, let's blow off some steam, have some fun, and really be focus more on the social aspect than on the ritual, esoteric aspects of masonry. And I would say today, even, that's so. I mean, the grotto, usually we'll get together for a stated meeting, either before or after dinner. But the social aspect, it plays very much into that. Being a member of both the shrine and the grotto, they're they're not necessarily similar. When it comes to the ritual and everything that happens, they were just started with a similar intent. Um, some people obviously like one better than the other. I know that grotto, usually the dues are significantly lower than the shrine, which has led to them being called the poor man's shrine in the past. But
I've been
I
told
don't.
that the prophets don't like that.
Right. No. And being a member of both, I don't think that's a fair representation at all. I, like I said, they both have something different to offer. Um, if you want something that's a little bit more social without having to be involved with, clubs and units, and the shrine can be a commitment, right? In that, you're not just going to shrine stated meetings, but, you're going to be practicing, year round for the state shrine association meeting. I mean, either with, marching or part of the band, or, you know, with one of the clown units. It's a
Oh
significant
God,
time
the
in
clown
both.
units.
Yeah, it's a significant investment in both time and money. The grotto, I think, I feel like it's less of a commitment, which may be fitting for other brothers. So if you want a lower commitment, I would say definitely try out the grotto first. If you want something that you want to be involved in, like all the time, then that's when you really get into the shrine.
So
So go ahead, Gabe.
I was just gonna say, my fiance said that if I ever join the shrine, I am under no condition allowed to join the clown unit because she's deathly afraid of clowns.
That's funny.
Uh
So, Billy, I know the shrine does like the burn hospitals and things like that for the kids. What does
Yes.
the grotto? Because they were based on a charity, just like the shrine, but they do a specific thing, right?
That's correct. So the grotto really focuses on providing dental care for
Ah, that's right.
handicapped and disadvantaged children. So what they will do is they will find a child who, and it doesn't even have to be like a severe mental or physical handicap, but even if a child is about to go through surgery for some reason or another, that may qualify them for free dental care, and it's a significant amount. I've sat in on meetings where um, they paid several $1,000s worth of dental care for one child just in this one meeting.
That's awesome.
That is awesome.
Yeah. So if you have like a burning passion for dental care, that's a great appendant body.
Right. And when you think about it, right, I mean, dental care a lot of times is something we don't think about. I mean, if
Oh
we're bad
yeah,
about going to the doctor, we're even worse about the dentist, right? You're not going unless your mouth is hurting for some reason.
you got it. Yeah, it's tough.
So, Rit, you had a question that you texted us about before we started recording. What is your question?
Snap, Gabe, you're gonna call me out like that? What? Where did it go?
Uh, I can pull it up if you want me to.
Hold on. Here we go. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. Question is, how does one most effectively, continually learn to control one's emotions and passions?
Ooh.
I think everybody struggles with that, right?
hmm So I think really what I'm looking for, and I'm not going to give it away what kind of brought this question about yet. Um, but like, what can you do? What are those things that you can prepare yourself to be in control of your emotions and passions?
Well, for me, one of the big things is trying to minimize ego, right?
Mm-hmm.
Trying to find ways to remind myself to be humble. Because, I mean, everyone struggles with arrogance, but, like, I have become, in the past, have had serious issues with it. So I try and find ways to be humble. And this is going to sound terribly 15-year-old gothish, which
I
my
love it.
apologies to any of our listeners that are 15-year-old goths. We love you anyway. Been there, done that. But I think a lot about death. Thinking about death is very humbling. And given the fact that this is the episode about funerals, I was kind of thinking about it a lot. And, one of the big things is, hey, we're all going to die. And
Yeah.
when you're dead and gone, who cares what people said about you? I mean, yeah, there's this thing like leave a legacy that others will be proud of, right?
Yeah.
But realistically speaking, chances are 100 years, 200 years, if you're lucky, nobody's going to remember you, the person, right? I mean, there'll be pictures of you, and you'll be in a family tree, and maybe some stories will have been written about you. If you're really
Yeah.
famous,
Maybe.
maybe somebody will publish a book about you, but nobody will know you, the person. And so, to be you, the person, to free your mind of all the vices and superfluities, so to speak. You have to be humble and concentrate and keep in mind that in 200 years, nobody's going to know you. So you got to live a good life while you can and while you're alive. That's kind of what I've been thinking about.
I like it.
Thinking about dying.
That lines up with one of my answers to it. What do you think, Billy?
So for me, I think it's, and this was kind of something I picked up from my years in management, is I'm very big into self-assessment, right? That every once in a while, especially if early in the morning, you wake up, you're calm, set aside some time to meditate, think about yourself, right? And be honest with yourself. Are there things you need to improve? And mastering your passions and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of things that could encompass, right? If you get angry, it's being able to recognize, when you're getting angry, being able to admit that you're wrong. Sometimes we argue when we know we're in the wrong, but we do it out of pride, like Gabriel said. Learn how to subsume that and admit when you're wrong. But it could be beyond that, right? It could be addiction as well, right? Not just drugs, but it could be gambling or porn or something like that. And that it has a negative influence in your life.
Mm-hmm.
During meditation, recognize it, own up to it, and then figure out, how can I make myself a better person? How can I get past this? Or how can I at least manage it until I can get to a point to where I can leave it behind altogether? So I think self-assessment for me is a really good tool to doing that.
I love it. I think, I mean, it completely lines up with one of the answers. Do you guys kind of know where this question came out of?
Maybe. I wanted to build on something that Billy was saying. In knowing that you have faults and assessing your faults, one of the important things to remember is that others have faults too, and that's why we're all in it together. Two viewpoints on here. One's a sectarian one that's not appropriate for Lodge. The other one is a non-sectarian one that is appropriate for Lodge. Right? Like, I'm a Christian, right? And I believe that, like, we're all sinners. Like, we're all, we're not deserving of salvation and all that. And,
Right.
my salvation is through the Son of God, a significantly higher power than me, right?
Uh-huh.
But, to translate that to kind of a non-sectarian viewpoint that is more appropriate for Lodge, if we think about the level, right? How do Master Masons meet? On the level.
A lot.
The level is not something that we step down to, right? Like, we're not stepping into the mud to get onto the level. The level is so much higher than we can ever imagine it to be. It's something that we all strive for. And the reality of it is, completely outside of a religious perspective, even from a totally irreligious perspective, right? Let's just, like, a humanist level, we're all broken human beings. We all have problems. No one is perfect, and each one of us is missing something, oftentimes incredibly crucial to functioning as a normal person. And that's why we strive towards that higher level, because Masonry is not men that have gotten together simply because they're good men. It's because they're good men who know that they're also in some way broken, and that everybody else in that lodge is a good man who is also in some way broken, and we're all in it together. So, teamwork.
That journey.
No, I
Yeah,
like it.
It's that journey from the rough ashlar to the perfect ashlar.
Right. We're all in this crappy boat together.
Yeah. And I mean, what you guys have just said pretty much lines up with, because I had 3 components I think you can do to learn to subdue your passions. And you guys hit on 2 of them, because Gabe talked about death, and I put contemplation down as one, and our faults, which we learn through experience.
Yep.
So that's one of them.
So,
But the one I think you guys kind of danced around that I think was first and foremost is education, learning something.
mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
we as Masons learn things we process it through contemplation and then put it into experience, which would create wisdom that ultimately would allow us to subdue our passions and emotions, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like,
Right.
seems like the formula. And this was all based on the comma placement debate. I won't really go much further, but I know you guys
Yeah.
know what we're talking about. And
Right.
if you haven't been subjected to it yet, it's kind of silly. But it dawned on me today that it's all semantics that we're arguing over, because whether there's a comma or not, to be able to subdue passions, you have to educate yourself.
Yeah. And
The more you know,
for anybody who's wondering what that is, I'm not going to say anything other than what came you here to do, and now you know what the comma argument is about.
and the 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 whether it's there or not, to me, became irrelevant today, because great if it's there, you know, awesome.
For a
If it's
while,
not,
I have held the
it,
position that it is both simultaneously, because both versions of that statement are equally true.
yeah, and I think they really mean the same thing, whether there's a comma there or not.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's where it just hit me today. It's like, oh well, I don't have to have an opinion on this anymore. It means the same thing. Uh, that reminds me, right at the beginning of the fellowcraft, I am flipping through my monitor. It's right at the front. Let's see. Never mind. Proceed. I can't find it. But it talks about speculative masonry, what it teaches us to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it says one of the first things is to learn to subdue the passions. Where is it? Yeah. Okay, so by speculative masonry, we learn to subdue the passions, no comma in there. Act upon the square, keep it on good rapport, maintain secrecy, and practice charity. But either way, means the same thing.
I think it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we had one more quick question before we go to the main subject. This is a question that one of my relatives asked me because she saw something that I posted on Facebook, and she said, "What is this high priest thing? When did you join the church, and what do you do?" And the answer to that is it's not affiliated with a church. The high priest is the president equivalent position of a Royal Arch chapter. So for Blue Lodge Masons, it would be the worshipful master of a craft lodge. In Royal Arch, it is the high priest of the Royal Arch chapter, and for Lions Club, it would be like the president of the local Lions Club chapter,
Right.
But yeah, so that's just that question. But anyway, so for today, again, our subject is Masonic Funerals 101, how, what, and why. Something I wanted to address really quick was that we've been as human beings, we've been burying our dead for a long time. The practice of burial actually predates human beings as we know them. This existed back to the Neanderthals, so I technically don't know if Neanderthals are considered human beings because they are a separate species, but let's just say mankind, and that'll encompass it. But burials go back 300,000 years. There were burials that they found where it had pollen spread all over the body and then buried on top. Although it's unclear whether or not that was deliberate. It could have been rodents, but it seems like it could have been. It's not exactly clear when funeral practices originated. We have no clear date on that. So, like burials, we can say about 300,000 years. Funerary practices, nobody knows. Sometime around that time, but maybe later.
Were you able to find like the first documented funeral? Like they know it's not the oldest one, but maybe because we know it was going on
Oh
six
man.
thousand years ago.
Well, we know that because of the Egyptians and stuff. But
Yeah.
no,
So
Right.
just being generous, you would think at least could be going on for 10,000 years.
probably.
Mhm.
I have no idea, but that's one of those things that like we really don't know
Mm-hmm.
when that started. History. Oh, here we go. I just looked up funeral rites through times. One of the oldest known burial discoveries was in 24,000 BC's. There in 5000 BC, there's the oldest known dolmen was discovered. And then 400 BC, or I mean, sorry, 4000 BC, the Egyptians discovered embalming. So, but those are all like they say funeral rites, but those are still all burial practices. Obviously, by the time the Egyptians hit, we have funeral practices, right? Because if they're building elaborate tombs and stuff like that, they already have concepts of like memorials of the dead and stuff. Like there is something deeper going on that.
Yeah, the funeral really signifies the mourning process,
And
to
that's
where
where
the
we're
brain had finally been developed for that kind of thought.
and that's where we're kind of at a loss, right?
Yeah.
So, who knows?
They talk about all kinds of primates mourning the loss of their younglings. They don't bury them, but the mourning may have come first, and
Yeah.
burial just an expression of. But I think maybe it was more sanitary. They don't smell good after a few days.
Yeah, so but I would say probably, the oldest known funeral like the one that we can confirm was probably funerary rites is the Red Lady of Paviland, which is or it might be Paviland or Paviland, I don't know. It's in Britain. It's a lady that they discovered that I think they discovered her in the 1800s, and she was from 24,000 BC, and they covered her body in red ochre, right? Like they buried her with her personal possessions and all sorts of stuff. So we know that
Oh,
that's very deliberate. The Neanderthal burials we don't necessarily know because the bright colored pollen could have been deposited there intentionally or unintentionally by scavengers. It's not quite clear. So anyway, that's just kind of, I wanted to give some background on that. And Billy and I were talking today, and we're not really sure when Masonic funerals started. A safe assumption is to say around when symbolic lodges started, because one of the reasons why the United Grand Lodge of England got together, one of their big things was how to correctly run festive boards, right? So if they were worried about how to correctly run a table lodge, which is a very lighthearted sort of thing, then surely they must have been concerned as well with the Masonic funeral. So, but that's just me pulling things out of my butt. So,
well, and if you really start reasoning, when there was operative masonry, surely they had some kind of like see off to the yonder world
surely.
for their masters,
Oh, yeah.
But so, before we get in too far, what is a Masonic funeral?
It's your last Masonic rites. RITES.
And RIGHTS. Both.
Yeah. Yeah. I really don't even know how to properly answer that aside from your last rites, but it is a beautiful ceremony that talks about the certainty of death. And I've had Masons tell me I don't want one because it's so sad. They don't want the funeral to be sad. But, you know, I've kind of come to the conclusion that life's best friend is death. What would life exactly be without death? I mean, it get boring after a while.
Yeah.
So,
And in the simplest terms, I could say it is a non-sectarian graveyard memorial service or graveyard funeral service. Like that does not convey what it actually is. But if somebody said, "Hey, what is that? Can you explain to me?" I'd be like, "It's a funeral service, right?" Like that's it. But it's so much more than that.
so it's funny you say non-sectarian. I don't know if I should bring it up on the podcast, but I was going to when we get into an actual service, there's a line in there that it's like
Yep. I know
that
exactly what you're talking about. Through the merits
that
of the line of the tribe of Judah.
oh man, you read my mind.
Spoilers, depending on your jurisdiction, Masonry may or may not be just very, very thinly veiled Christianity.
But,
This it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but in Texas, Masonry is inherently very Christian, and I'm okay with that. But it makes some brothers like not comfortable, which we got to respect that. So, but what is the Lodge of Sorrow?
That's the fourth lodge that you can open, and that's required in order to perform a funeral service. A lot of guys haven't even seen that now that you say that, because I mean, you nowadays you only have to open it up once a year. When the new master's installed, he opens his Lodge of Sorrow, which is exactly like a Master Mason opening Master Mason's Lodge, with the addition of saying of Lodge of Sorrow a few times in certain spots. And then he calls it from labor. He doesn't call it to refreshment. And so it's kind of like quasi open. Not sure how that works. So then during the year, if
it's
a
how
funeral,
the master's lodge is called from labor during a master's degree. Obviously, I can't specify more than that, but you know what I'm talking about.
yeah, and of course they both have specific purposes, because we call from labor in the Lodge of Sorrow for the purpose of conducting Masonic burial services. So there is a purpose. So yeah, it's very similar to that. So you're kind of still quasi at labor, and it stays open the whole year until he closes it right before the new master's installed. But it allows you to go straight to the funeral home and do Masonic burials.
Yep. Now, question: do you think we should open it once a year and then close it once a year, or do you think we should open and close it every time?
It's so different nowadays. Because the lodge, when Freemasonry started, if the funeral wasn't there, it was right across the street at another building.
Yeah.
So everybody was in town anyways.
Nowadays, you got to drive across the Metroplex.
Yeah, and that's really different. So while I'm not a fan of shortening and making things easier,
this is one of those cases.
Yeah, to where you gotta be realistic with society, because we have it all the time to where there's a funeral in Azle or a funeral in South Fort Worth, and
when we buried Brother Torty, we had to drive all the way to, was it Dallas? Somewhere north of Dallas, I think.
mm-hmm.
And that was a bit of a hike for some of us.
Yeah, you never know where you're going to end up. So it's just a little tough to do that. Now, the Grand Lodge, if they do a funeral service, they have to open up a Grand Lodge representation every time.
Yeah. So
but
actually,
that's rare.
That kind of this is I have a bunch of questions prepped. So that leads into one of them. Who presides at a Masonic funeral if a Grand Lodge officer is present?
Ever who's planned to do it. Because if a member of your lodge dies, you should have a team that can do it. So preferentially, his lodge does the funeral. If the Grand Master shows up and says, hey, I want to do this, you should certainly yield that to him. Mm-hmm. You want to make sure he knows it.
So I have a minor correction to make. According to the monitor, if a Grand Lodge officer is present, they preside, regardless of whether or not there's a team. But it is the prerogative of said Grand Officer to hand it off to the Worshipful Master of the deceased brother's lodge if he wants to.
So
according to protocol, according to the monitor, protocol says if a Grand Officer shows up, he's in charge. And it just from there on up, it just depends on seniority.
So, like, they opened up a Grand Lodge representation and came to do the funeral.
No, this is just like if one is in attendance.
Okay, gotcha. Because they would be doing it under whoever set up the funeral service. So if that lodge set it up and they're doing it under that lodge of sorrow, then they're going to get the credit no matter who does it.
Yeah.
So, but the Grand Master, I guess, has his authority to.
Yeah,
I'm going
and
to
so
do it.
basically, like, he would just preside over the service itself, and then, but the monitor said, like, he can hand it off if he wants to, which he's going to in most cases.
Yeah, that makes sense. He's in charge.
So I guess then kind of, but anybody can preside. Any Master Mason can preside over a Masonic funeral. It doesn't have to be the worshipful master, but it should be your worshipful master, but he doesn't have to. He can hand it off to a more experienced brother if he needs to.
So, is there a law that says I can understand? Well, I'm not even that. Does it have to be a Master Mason?
Yeah, I was looking it up, and entered apprentices and fellow crafts can be present, but they cannot participate.
Okay, I think I've read that. Yep.
Yeah,
okay.
So it was like they can be present and they have to have their aprons correctly configured and everything like that, but they just can't participate, which that's fair. I was at a funeral once, and we had an EA with us, and somebody was saying he can't be here, and I was telling this fellow, no, he can absolutely be here. He just can't participate. Like, it's cool.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to leave.
I mean, he can be buried as a Mason, so he can be at a Masonic funeral.
But yeah, like there's a bunch of interesting things about the funeral. Like it's often called the last degree. So sometimes you'll hear some of the guys who have been, like they'll be like 33rd degrees or whatever, or Knight Templar Cross of Honor or something like that, and they'll say, hey, like I'm still waiting for that last degree, because they're talking about the funeral. So there's actually also different kinds of funerals, and I put together a list of them. So for Craft Lodge, there are graveside services, and then there are memorial services. So a memorial service is something you do if you can't do a graveside service. Sometimes they'll also do memorial services at the lodge instead of a graveside service, because sometimes the family doesn't want any Masonic burial at all, and we have to respect that. But the lodge may want to put on a memorial service for the brethren of the lodge privately, and that's within the lodge's prerogative to do. But there's also funerals for the Scottish Rite Knights Rose Croix. So there's a Rose Croix burial. Shrine Legion of Honor members. So if you're a veteran of the United States Armed Forces and you joined the Shrine and you joined the Legion of Honor, there's a burial for that. The Knights Templar of the Commandery have their own funeral service, and brothers and sisters of the Order of Eastern Star have their own burial service as well. And you can have all of them at once if you wanted to.
Got me.
Well, yeah, and this is actually a little sad to think about this too, but I know for a fact that Rainbow has their own burial service.
Oh,
stop. Oh my God, that's
way
terrible.
To bring it down, Billy.
Well, yeah. Well, and the reason I bring
no
this up
idea
is because
though.
when my wife was a grand officer in the Grand Assembly of Oklahoma, they had a car accident where several grand officers for Rainbow were riding in the same vehicle, and they did have to have a Rainbow a Rainbow funeral.
That is terrible.
That's tough.
And for anybody that doesn't know, and I'm sure you've heard us mention them before, but the International Order of Rainbow for Girls is kind of like a Masonic girls' youth organization. It's for girls, I believe aged 12 to 21, or am I confusing that with DMLA?
No, that's DMLA. Rainbow is 11 to 20,
11 to
but
20.
they also have, and DMLA has this too, they do have like pre-Rainbow, pre-DMLA groups, like pledges and squires that can be, I think, as young as 8 or 9.
Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, that's we've been talking about funerals. That's an incredibly sobering thought to begin with, but to think of youth organizations, kids, these are children, they have their own services, but life happens, unfortunately, or fortunately life happens. Unfortunately, death does too.
No.
Right.
So, but yeah, no, you could have all of them if you wanted to. The Scottish Rite Valley of Dallas has prepared. So I don't have a link to it, but if you Google Scottish Rite Valley of Dallas funeral burial form, they actually have a prepared form that you can include with your important paperwork, and it'll have like a check. Like they have check boxes, like you just check off like however many of these you want, and like you could get all of them done if you wanted to. Like for example, one of the questions I had is when does a Masonic funeral service occur when in conjunction with a traditional religious service? And then the other one I had was when does a Knight Templar funeral service occur in conjunction with a Craft Lodge burial service and a
So
religious service?
actually, I do have an answer to that because I've talked to several eminent commanders, and I talked to the past Grand Commander Jack Harper about that very subject for an article I'm writing for the magazine.
Shout out to our boy
And
Jack.
this,
We love you, dude.
yeah. So the suggestion is, though, of course, at this time, you don't want to overwhelm the family by having them sit through, ritual after ritual after ritual of different bodies. So the suggestion, and of course, it's always up to the brother, are the family in question. But the suggestion is really, if you're going to have both, have them in some way that kind of complements each other. So if you're going to have a craft lodge funeral, then you can have like a Knight Templar honor guard, um, that where
Mm,
you have a certain knight in full uniform with the sword at carry on either at the head and the foot of the casket.
Mm-hmm.
And that way you can have both at the same time without necessarily adding more time and grief to the family that are present.
Well, and I've already figured, screw my family. I'm gonna make them cry all I want. No, I'm kidding. I love my family, but no. Ideally, what I would do is do the Knight Templar memorial service in the chapel, and then the graveside service for the lodge.
Right.
I've seen the one you were talking about, Billy, where the Knights Templars did the kind of guarding the grave, the casket while the Masonic deal went on.
Hmm.
It was awesome. It was really cool.
So, but for anybody that's wondering, generally speaking, what will happen if you have a Masonic funeral, and by the way, for anybody that's wondering, generally speaking, a Masonic funeral is done in conjunction with your church's service, right?
Hmm.
So, generally speaking, what will happen is that after the memorial service in the chapel, and after the religious grade services, but before the lowering of the coffin, the religious service will take place. Or not the religious, the lodge funeral service will occur. Right, so you go chapel, graveside religious, Masonic graveside, lowering the coffin. The Texas Monitor specifically says that once the lodge has control of the funeral, it's done. Like the lodge has control of the funeral for the rest of the entire funeral. The lodge needs to be the last, and with the exception of the worshipful master inviting the priest for a benediction at the end of it, right? So, like, that's their prerogative. As far as appendant bodies go, if you have an appendant body funeral and a Masonic funeral and a religious service, the appendant body will go before, it will go after the religious services, but before the Masonic graveside service.
So I've been to many of these things to where you do have to be able to adjust on the fly because the way you described it is the way it should go ideally to where
Ideally.
last
Right.
thing is we're done, we go last and it's over, and it's about maybe 15 minutes at most,
It's
but it's
short, but it's
yeah, it's
powerful.
very powerful.
Right.
But if the people say no, we don't want you speaking at the graveside, but you can speak in the church, you just make adjustments. There's some parts where you dump some sand and stuff. You don't dump sand in the church or chapel. you know
Oh,
Right.
I don't? Watch me.
well, we used rose petals at my grandfather's. We y'all
That's
Billy, I
beautiful.
don't think you were there. I don't know if you were either,
I
Dave.
was not.
But yeah, you can make some adjustments and stuff like that. But you have to be able to adjust to their needs to where, you know, if it's a, you either move your ceremony here or we're not, you can't do it. You move your ceremony and you accommodate the family without question. You know,
Yeah.
it's their time.
And I haven't been to nearly as many funerals as you've been to, but every funeral that I've been to so far, there has been some sort of surprise detail or some last minute change or some moment of wait, what's happening now? That's happened.
Yeah.
It's always kind of a challenge. So one of the questions I have is, what equipment do you need? Right. Texas Monitor says you need a Holy Bible, square, and compasses, and they're covered by black crepe. So you'll have the Bible open to Ecclesiastes, right? And then you'll have the square and compasses usually bolted to the Bible. It's like really like, I know that the Masonic Service Bureau one is like, they've got one that's like, it's bolted to the Bible and it's all covered with black crepe. So the Bible is like on a board, so you can't open it or close it. It's like permanently affixed open to Ecclesiastes, and it's covered in this black crepe.
We
Which
have
is
the same
fine.
thing.
It's fine because that's, it is a Bible specifically for funerals. Although I feel a little bit odd about putting bolts in a Bible. And you should, well, this is an interesting question. Normally, I would say that, black suit, black tie, white shirt. But this is Texas. What do you guys feel about dressing down for funerals sometimes?
Oh, you totally go with the attire. But if you're performing in that ceremony, you better have on a suit and tie.
Yeah, you better
Yeah.
sweat.
You
I
know,
agree.
I don't care if it's July.
yeah, you're representing our craft in that. I've seen a lot of powerful moments come out of, a well done Masonic funeral service. People literally saying that I want to join now.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
what he was a part of. I want to join.
I do have to say, I have mixed feelings about using it as a way to promote the craft, but if done right, I think it kind of does it on its own. One thing, so I got to play junior warden while our current worshipful master Greg Wright did a funeral service. And one thing I have to say is I really like the way he ended it, because rather than saying, hey, come down and find out what we're about, he invited the family members at the funeral to come have dinner with us at our stated meeting and share stories of, their loved one. It's not, hey, we're putting a fix on you. It's like, hey, come
Yeah.
share your memories
Yep.
with us and we'll celebrate together.
Yeah, and that's one of those things. I never want to see anybody actively recruiting at a funeral.
Yeah.
Which I've seen that done,
Yeah.
and
And
I hate it
that's a
so
great
much.
point.
But if somebody
No,
asks, "Hey, like that was really meaningful. Like I want to learn more," then
yeah,
yes, I'll answer questions.
that's it.
Yeah.
If it happens, it should be from a well done last rites for that brother. That's your only focus, period. And that's the thing, is that when we do that and we focus on our job and what we're supposed to do, people out there see that and they're attracted to it. They're not attracted to somebody that's putting on a sales pitch last rites to try to get you
Yeah.
a petition.
Oof.
God,
Yeah.
that's just disgusting to even describe.
Yeah, just to think about it.
Yeah.
Follow up question to what equipment do you need? What should I wear on my person in addition to the suit? Generally speaking, black suit, black tie, white shirt, a white apron, white gloves, a black crepe around your left bicep, and a sprig of evergreen in the left lapel. And I say white apron very specifically because none of this past master's stuff, none of this officer's apron stuff, only white aprons. The only time that non-white aprons are used is when the funeral is being conducted by the Grand Lodge.
Yep.
Not by Grand Lodge officers individually, but by the Grand Lodge. So if a Grand Lodge officer is present, generally speaking, he's expected to wear just the white apron, unless it's the Grand Lodge conducting the ceremony itself.
Yeah.
So just kind of a note on that. Don't anybody go thinking it's okay to wear a past master's apron, because I've seen that
No,
done.
and put your best foot forward on the aprons. You know, you, I'm not a fan of cloth. I know they're common, but if you use them, make sure they look nice. You know, this is somebody's funeral.
Mm,
Do not have coffee stains on that sucker.
yeah. Chances are, you know, there's a lot of brothers, and I'm never gonna fight anybody on this, right? But there's a lot of brothers that believe you should never wear the apron you were given during your master's degree. They
Yeah,
believe
that's
that
true.
you should wear it only once, and that's on your coffin at your funeral. I disagree with that. I make sure that I wear my master's apron to every funeral I go to, because if there's anything that should be worn to a funeral, it's your master's apron. And I'm not gonna tell people no, you're wrong for doing it, but that's the way I feel about it.
Yeah, well, it tells us to wear it on all proper occasions and at our death to be laid atop our coffin and under the clods of clay. So it
Yep.
tells you can wear it on proper occasions. But if you're that guy, I'm not going to wear the one the lodge gave me.
And
Buy
that's okay.
another one. They're
Yeah.
15 bucks. They'll
The
ship it right to you.
And personally, honestly, I mean, I wear my apron when I'm helping confer a degree.
yeah.
I see that as a proper occasion too, right? You know,
Me
that's the
too.
apron. It's the apron I was presented with, or well, in my case, it's the second apron I was presented, but still, it has a lot of meaning for me.
Well, and the only reason why I don't wear mine when I go to lodge at 148 is because we have leather aprons there. But when I
Yeah.
travel to other lodges, I wear my apron. You know, I even have a small oil stain on it from when I helped move a trailer at an outdoor degree. It's got a little bit of love of labor from the craft on it, but you know that came out mostly with some saddle soap.
No, I think we've suffered since we've lost the habit of supplying our own apron.
Well, and you know
You
how
know,
that originated, right?
well, I'm sure when we quit decorating them, everybody's like, just
No, the
buy a
the
bunch.
origin of the cloth
Right.
aprons is when when new lodges would get chartered. They were a lot of times they were waiting on like the leather aprons to be made.
Hmm.
So this is what I've heard, right? And I've heard
Yeah.
this from several people. So you know it may be wrong, but this is the story. And
We're
this
talking
is how
way
all
back.
yeah this is like late 1800s, early 1900s, right? Not way back. So the new lodge would get chartered. They would be waiting for the leather apron because the leather apron takes longer to manufacture. And so in the meantime, the manufacturer would send ahead of the leather aprons, cloth aprons for the lodge to wear. And with each order of aprons, they would just send more
Oh,
cloth aprons. And eventually, members would just take the leather aprons home because they would be given the leather aprons as part of their masters or entered apprentice in some jurisdictions. And then all the cloth aprons would stay at the lodge. And eventually people just started leaving their leather aprons at home and just wearing the cloth aprons that were at the lodge. And that's why you see so many damn cloth aprons. And nowadays it's very standard to just buy cloth aprons. But the
oh,
origin of cloth aprons being commonplace came from
capitalism.
basically sample packs and capitalism. Yep. This is why Karl Marx was right. I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. I'm just joking, listeners. I won't talk about my love of communism on the podcast. Anyway, this is when we lose
You're going to get
listeners.
us in trouble. It's illegal to be a commie now.
Oh, yeah, that's right. According to Grand Lodge law, you cannot be a communist. I guess I won't go talking to any.
No,
But
I
I'm
think
kidding.
we've said it a million times on the podcast. You know, splurge, get yourself an apron case and a new leather apron, have it embroidered,
Yeah.
the apron case, and carry that sucker with you to lodge. It gives you a little pep in your step.
Yep. Bonus points if you get something cool embroidered on your apron case. I got the emblem of the Grand Lodge of the Republic of Texas embroidered on mine. Because
Legit,
I'm
too.
ridiculous. Interesting. Again, with the equipment question, what happens with my Scottish Rite 14th degree ring? And I ask this because there's a specific line of ritual that goes with this, right? If you didn't specify in a document somewhere, right? Nothing happens. It stays in a drawer, or it gets buried with you, or
Smelted.
whatever. Yeah, something happens, right? Like it's totally left up to chance. However, you should specify in a document somewhere what's to happen with it, because according to the ritual of the 14th degree, it should go to your widow, your oldest son, the friend who was loved above all others, or another Scottish Rite Mason. So that's the order of preference. So when you make sure that you have written down what happens with all your fancy Masonic bling, because otherwise it's going to get sold on eBay. So,
Actually,
Go ahead, Billy.
go for it,
Sorry.
Billy.
no, mine. Go ahead, because mine may actually kind of create a distraction. So
I was just going to say, or give them away before you die, if you have that option.
Yep.
If you're getting old and feeble, give those rings away.
yeah. So
Firstborn, whatever.
I think the important thing there too is make sure you have it documented. And honestly, I think that's the reason why we don't see more Masonic funerals today, is because a lot of brothers don't talk to their family about it. They don't document it in their will. They don't say, these are my wishes, because we don't like to think about death, even though you may say that's a big part of craft masonry, or even some of the appendant orders. But if you don't let anyone know that you want a Masonic burial service, you're not going to get a Masonic burial service.
And that's one of the questions I have written down. Is who should I tell about wanting a Masonic funeral? And the answer is everybody. You should tell your wife, your kids, your brother, your sister, everybody. You should tell your lodge, your friends, because when you die, if you have it written in your will and testament that you want a Masonic funeral, by the time they're reading your will and testament, too bad, dude, you're already buried,
Yeah.
So you have to have it known, whether it's an envelope on your bedside table or something like that. You got to put some level of documentation down on paper, as always. If it's not written down, it doesn't really count. But you got to tell people. People around you got to know.
Go ahead, Billy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, a lot of funeral places, right, and mortuary services, funeral directors, that if you buy a plot ahead of time and let them know up front, I'm a Mason, I would like to have a Masonic burial service, then they will make sure that happens as well.
True.
I was going to say too that. Wait, it's slipping away. God dang it, Billy. It was about.
Sorry, Red.
Oh, there it comes. Maybe we need to think about including that in our investigation, like as an additional form of, do you want a Masonic funeral? Is that something that may, and show it to them, of course, at some point or another. And if they agree to it, ask their wife if they're cool with it too.
Yeah.
And then I can put it in the database as a, note on their account. They want a Masonic funeral. So if we hear so-and-so passed away, I can look real quick. Okay, we got to get it planned.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now, kind of going with that, do I have to have a Masonic funeral? The answer is no. You do not have to have a Masonic funeral.
No.
Right.
One of our oldest past masters, he was actually our senior past master. Sam Levacy, real sweetheart of a man. He was just hitting the cusp of being a 50-year Mason, and he'd actually just gotten installed as worshipful master of his lodge at the age of 100. Very healthy, and then kind of out of the blue, experienced some health trouble and passed away very quickly. And I was very surprised to find out when I got to his funeral service that nope, he did not want a Masonic funeral. He was eligible for military honors. He was eligible for a Masonic funeral. All this stuff. Nope, just wanted a simple religious service, and that was it. And it was so very Sam.
It was.
It was just the cleanest, most efficient process.
So that reminds me of another question. Do you have to be buried with your apron?
Depends on what you want.
I would say.
I would say bury me with an apron on, and then put an apron on my casket just for the sake of the ritual.
Hmm.
So I think that's something you need to specify too, because you'll end up having a grandson like me that you didn't specify that at some point, and I use your apron in the ceremony, and it's like there's no way I'm putting this thing in the ground,
Yeah.
you know, because I knew my grandfather, and of course, he was proud to be a Mason, but he was a Mason to be a Scottish Rite Mason because he had polio, and the Scottish Rite Hospital saved his life.
Yeah.
So
Mm, yeah.
he was proud of it, but he wasn't active. He didn't really know much about it at all, except for they were responsible for saving him.
Which, obviously, like, that's not, you know, the kind of Mason that we're necessarily looking for, but it is one of the sweetest reasons why I've heard somebody be a Mason.
Absolutely, and he gave me a lot of good stories about becoming a Mason and the benefits of it. He wasn't super active, but you know, putting that apron in the ground, there's been moments to where like I've sat in lodge with my dad, like when we gave his golden trial pin away. Uh, I wore his dad's apron,
Yeah.
so it kind of felt like he was there, and it was such a magical moment,
That is cool.
just having that apron on. So it was so hard for me to put that, and I know that's kind of selfish or whatever, but he was special.
Yeah.
So
It's hard to let
I
go
kept it.
sometimes.
But if he would have said, I want to be buried with my apron, without question, not a second thought, I would have put it in the dirt. But
Mm-hmm.
nobody knew if he wanted a Masonic funeral or not. But I got to run that whole funeral from top to bottom because he wasn't much of a church guy as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, well, we're doing a Masonic funeral then. Throwing that in.
So, one question that I have is: are entered apprentices and fellow crafts entitled to a Masonic burial?
Who can get a Masonic funeral? Rit, you've actually mentioned this a couple times in the past, so I want you to give it for because you've got this practically memorized by now.
Let me answer that question with a question, Billy.
Okay,
When do we call a candidate brother? What
after
degree?
after he takes the entered apprentice's obligation.
That's when he's eligible to to be buried as a Mason.
Okay. Well, and the reason I ask is because looking through Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, it actually states in there that burials are reserved for Master Masons. And, admittedly, this is a book that was written 100 and some odd years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But, the question is for anybody who maybe read it in there, they may not even realize that they're entitled, even if they were just made an entered apprentice.
Yeah, no, that is a big misconception. And, I don't have Grand Lodge Law handy to search the PDF real quick, but, um, you know, they're certainly entitled. I just don't know. It might have a reference of when that changed because I don't know that was always the case.
Okay.
But it seemed that always made sense to me that was like always the case. I've never looked into it. I've just assumed because if you as a operative Mason, if you are entered into the craft and you're taken on as an apprentice and somebody's getting to know you and teach you and you get crushed by a stone at work, it seems like they're going to have a ceremony for you, like, damn, that's a bummer, buddy, you know, something. So, I was just thinking of it in that terms, but it's never really piqued my interest until now.
So one of the things I wanted to ask was, how does that new Grand Lodge law affect this? Where entered apprentices have to, if they pass a year, they have to apply for, the continuation of their entered apprentice, year, and they have to pay $50 to the lodge.
So that right there is something that needs to be interpreted. But if you take it at face value and the rule of if Grand Lodge law is quiet about something, then it's permissible. It does not specifically say after they pass their year, they're excluded from funerals because they weren't in the past
Yeah, they just
when they
can't. They
passed their
just
year.
can't attend lodge.
So that's
Well,
what
And
changed.
I would argue that the funeral is not lodge. So until Grand Lodge says no, I would say full bore, go for it. If you're in doubt,
well,
Yeah.
how would you handle a brother who was suspended for non-payment of dues? Would they be entitled to a funeral?
No.
no, they're
I
not
mean,
entitled to.
so would a brother who passes that year and hasn't paid I guess that nominal fee, would they be considered suspended or?
So let me tell you this. If you have a family that comes to you and you've got a brother that went NPD, especially in the last 3 years, because you just pay their dues and they're automatically reinstated, and they
Right.
ask for a Masonic funeral and he's NPD, either dig out of your pocket or pass the hat or something and get him current, even though he may have technically passed away. Get him current so you can do that funeral with a clear
Right.
mind.
Yeah.
Make it happen.
There are and even when that's the case, there are some things that it's worth getting in trouble for.
Exactly. Like if it's he's past 3 years and has to be investigated and all that, you might contact your DDGM, get the money, you know, raised to put in for his dues and get him paid up. Because the last thing you want to tell his family is that, no.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Mhm.
if it comes down to it, technically he's suspended Mason, so he's not entitled to it.
Yeah.
Well,
And
so-
and I. Oh, go ahead.
And I was gonna say, and technically, I don't give a crap what what the law says in regards to that.
Look, we
Okay.
all know what you were thinking. You didn't have to admit it.
Yeah. Well, and I take it. So, if you look at Masonic ritual, right? Tons of it is lifted from religious ceremonies, right? And I go back to this like it's called the seven corporal duties, or depending on where you are, it's the seven corporal duties, the seven corporal sacraments, the seven corporal acts, right? Just depends on where you are. They call it different things, but feed the hungry, clothe the naked, bind up the wounds of the afflicted, entertain strangers, and then one of them is bury the dead. It's one of the most important things that we can do is bury the dead. And so this is one of those things where I'm saying, like, it's worth getting in trouble.
Well, and so the reason I also bring up like the non-payment of dues is, so here's a bit of useless trivia that
Love this.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Podcast filler.
I don't know about podcast filler. I love this trivia.
So I was looking up, what is a Masonic offense? What actually constitutes as a Masonic offense? And one thing that I did find in there from a list of Masonic offenses from the late 1800s was that if a Mason had been suspended or expelled and he had sons who were still members of the craft, who then proceeded to put Masonic emblems on his grave marker after he passed away, that would be considered a grave offense.
Oh, buddy. I love it. I'm all about these grave offensives. That's pretty fantastic.
Right.
That is so funny. A question I had here was how many Masonic funeral services are out there? This is a crappy answer, but theoretically infinite. Every jurisdiction has different rituals, and some jurisdictions have no ritual for it, which means that lodges are up to their own to devise their own services from scratch. So theoretically, as many as there are lodges and then some, because a lodge may have multiple versions of ritual. In Texas, we have several kinds.
Right.
We have the revised Sam Canty, the original Sam Canty, the Nat Washer service, the Sayers service, the 1972 memorial service, and the 2013 memorial service. That's 6 of them that are official.
Are those all in the monitor?
No. There's the original Sam Canty, the Nat Washer service, and the Sayers service have to be ordered specially from Grand Lodge. Only the revised Sam Canty, The 72 service and the 2013 service are available in the standard Texas Monitor. But you can get the other ones through Grand Lodge. You just have to order them specially.
And you can find some differences too in like the old Hamilton and Taylor monitors.
And you can use those.
Yeah. Because
do y'all have
nobody's saying you have to use a specific version of it. You know, the monitor is there to help you.
Sam Levacy actually piecemealed like 3 or 4 of them
we
together.
had one. We were calling it the Levacy funeral.
Yeah, well, it was majority Sam Canty.
But he put some other stuff in it that was interesting.
He did.
And it was good. I need to get a copy of that from you, by the way.
I don't have it. That was in his head.
Are you kidding? I thought Will had one.
Did he?
I think he had one. But anyway. So another question. Can a Masonic funeral be done without a religious service? Yes. I've been to 2 that did not have religious services accompanying them. Generally speaking, though, you will have some form of religious service that goes with it. Let's see. When do you plan your funeral? Yesterday.
Right.
I'm 26 and while I have not already pieced everything out, like I've got life insurance. That life insurance is going to pay for my burial when that happens. You know, if I kick over tonight, it'll be paid for. This comes from my life insurance.
So
and I have relatives that know what I want. So,
is that too personal to ask?
What
you're gonna do after you die? Not like what's gonna happen to you after. What are you gonna do with your body?
Throw me in the trash, to quote Danny DeVito in I'm a big fan of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. So my joke answer is always throw me in the trash.
Yeah.
But no, I actually haven't made up my mind quite yet, and I have two options. One of them would be this is not my first option. My second option would be to be cremated and have my ashes scattered in the Panhandle. Because I'm not from the Panhandle, but I love the Panhandle. It's beautiful up there. And then my first option would be to be buried in a very simple pine wood box, maybe even balsa wood if we can get it. And just have something that's easy and biodegradable and everything like that. And to get buried, this requires me to own my own property, but eventually I would like to buy my own land out in the country, and with the intent of being buried on that land, and then plant a damn tree on top of me.
So you're meaning buried immediately, unembalmed?
Yeah.
Yes.
As fast as possible. Refrigerate me for as long as you need to, and then stick me in the ground and literally plant a tree on me.
That would be legit.
But that requires me to buy some land, and I am 26 and broke, so there's that.
Well, and if you bury somebody on your land, you have to disclose it when you sell it. It's like,
yes.
Oh man, because I've got 5 acres. I've literally thought about that, and it's like, I can't do that.
Yeah, no, I would do it. So plan your funeral yesterday.
Agreed.
Billy,
are you going to be cremated or embalmed?
I am going to be cremated, and I mean, I hate to say it, but after I pass, I really am up for whatever the family.
I really don't care.
Yeah. So my wife was like, "You're being cremated." I'm like, "I'm good with that." So.
Yeah. Yep. I'm deathly afraid of being buried alive, so I would like to be refrigerated for a couple days.
Are you going to take one of those kooky caskets like, Edgar Allan Poe had?
Nah, I'm just going to get them to asphyxiate, make sure I'm dead. Just if the corpse looks like it might still be alive, just asphyxiate it. Just pillow over the face. The corpse is not going to care.
It reminds me of the Office episode where the Schrutes, Dwight Schrute, they bury their grandmother and they shoot them with a shotgun 5 times to make sure they're dead because they inadvertently buried somebody alive.
See, I find that relatable, but only because I'm terrified of being buried alive. So I have 2 questions here before we close out. Okay. Why is it important to go to a Masonic funeral? As an attendee, why is it important to go?
Oh, well, I'll jump in and say, first of all, It's to support our fallen brother. He's no longer falling. He has fallen. So we go support him and his family. But I know, Gabe, I've been to a couple, maybe. I know one at least, funeral. And when we left Paul Solemn, I was so charged up to be a Mason at that moment. That lasted for a good month.
Yeah. Oh man, I cried pretty hard during Paul's funeral.
Dude, I'm telling, and it just gives you that feeling like, the Lord just kind of overwhelms you with you're doing the right thing, you're in the right moment. It feels like all the things come together, and you're like, I'm here because I'm a Mason,
Yep.
and you realize that, and it's like, gosh, dang, I got to do more of that. And I know that's a little selfish, but it's
Yeah.
something that happens if you're there
And
in the
it was
moment.
a near mystical experience too. When the rabbi started singing the prayers, I was just like,
Oh,
whoa, like I'm on a different planet now.
that
It
and
just
that one was
blew my
super
mind.
special. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very beautiful service, and it like that was one of those moments where like I am going to carry instances of memories from Paul's funeral with me for as long as I have functioning memory. Like just that it was a very powerful experience.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever been to a Jewish funeral, but that was my
No,
first.
that was my
And
first too.
I, yeah, I love new things, especially when there's beautiful things. They didn't put
Rit,
flowers.
Rit, I'm from the Gulf Coast of Texas. I'd never been to a Jewish funeral before.
They didn't put flowers out either, right? Like,
No, no flowers, just a pine box, no embalming, very serious. It was awesome to see, and I ended up doing a bunch of research on Jewish funerary customs afterwards, and it was just incredible. For
yeah,
anybody that's not familiar, really do yourself a favor and look up traditional Jewish funerary customs. It's really cool stuff. So,
I bet. Yeah.
the other question I had is why is it important for you to why is it important for you to prepare for your own funeral?
I think really and truly, I've thought a lot about this. That your funeral is for your family,
Yep.
and it's
Right.
not for you. So you need to they need to be included in it. And if your wife says, I don't want a Masonic funeral because my mom is, take your pick religion that's against it and it's going to cause consternation, you you kick that thing out,
Yeah.
because that's nothing that happens at your funeral is going to change what
Yeah.
happens to you at the pearly gates, if that's what you believe.
And at that point, you just ask the lodge to do a private memorial service.
You got it. So make it something that your family is going to be able to enjoy as much as they can, if that's the right word.
Yeah.
Uh, and if a Masonic funeral is something they're not, then you cut it out. But if they like it, I think it's a beautiful thing because it gets people thinking.
Yep.
So,
So for you younger brothers like me, make sure you pick a woman that's cool with masonry.
uh, the reason I think it's important also is because when your family is going to be grieving when you pass away, right? Um, especially if you're married, your spouse is going to have a million things that are going to be demanding her attention. The last thing I want my wife to be focused on is, is that right? If there's one thing I can take off of her mind to make that transition easier, then I want to do it. And so that's why, I've already planned a lot of it. I have my will; it's already filled out. My wishes are already filed. So that way, if it happens and I pass away, she doesn't have to worry about it. It's already on autopilot at that point, and she can focus on the grieving process, our partying process, whatever it may be.
Partying process.
Yeah.
I want you to throw me
Okay.
a luau.
An Irish wake. Yeah.
An Irish wake. Well, heck yeah. I'm not Irish, but why not, right?
Right.
Whatever you want to do, man.
So, it, the time has come to wrap up, and this I couldn't go and not quote the service for this episode because it's so appropriate. But this week's fraternal quote is from the Sam Canty Revised Masonic Burial Service. What are all the externals of majesty, the pride of wealth, or charms of beauty when nature has paid her last just debt? In the grave all fallacies are detected, all ranks leveled, all distinctions are done away. Here the scepter of the prince and the staff of the beggar lie side by side. And that's from the Grand Lodge of Texas, Ancient Free and Accepted Masons, Monitor of the Lodge.
That's probably my second favorite portion of that ceremony.
Yep. It's hard not to even read that without choking up. It's powerful.
It is power. And if you're sitting there grieving, it kind of takes you in that moment, to breathe in and realize what a life that person lived. You're there grieving, and what a chance you have to live, and improve society, whatever it is, that positive motivation. Okay. But I got to say, favorite line, though, is the cradle and the coffin stand side by side. That one right there just gets me, and it's like, ooh, you better get busy, boy.
Yeah. So, gentlemen, closing thoughts. Rit first, then Billy, then me.
So I'm currently it's in the back burner, but I've already started the paper. I think death is something that we overlook as Masons so much. I don't want to say it's a taboo subject. Maybe it is, but it's just not a subject a lot of people want to talk about. It's not that fun. And I think as Masons, we have so many signs and symbols and ceremonies and last rites that deal with death that it should be something that we contemplate on a regular basis. How else are we going to be able to welcome the grim tyrant as a kind messenger if we don't prep ourselves for that moment? It's inevitable. And I think this episode we pointed out all that, getting that stuff set up with your family is important. Making sure your brothers and all your family know if you want a Masonic funeral. But you got to get yourself ready for that moment yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the beautiful thing about this craft. And especially those funeral services. Go read them if you haven't seen one. And I'm telling you, it'll get you in the feels, man.
How about you, Billy?
So for me, I mean, one of the things I love about Masonry there are so many powerful moments, powerful images that we have during the different rituals. And I think the funeral ritual can be just as powerful, right? But it's wonderful in that it's something that's not kept within the confines, of a lodge that's closed behind doors. It's one of the few rituals we can show everybody. And you can look through, history. There have been noted times when the Masonic funeral has been looked at and celebrated, right? I found out, Benjamin Franklin, he officiated at Voltaire's funeral in 1778. I've seen pictures of President McKinley that, at the viewing of his body, when you see the pictures in the illustrated journals of the day, there's Knight Templar guards at attention at the foot and the head of the body. And these are powerful images, I think, that resonate.
Yeah.
We should share those. We should, I think for me, it's a comfort knowing that's the powerful image that I'm going to leave this world on.
Yeah, it's a real opportunity. I think you had a good point too, that, the ceremony of the last rites is just unequivocally agreed that should be a public ceremony. Like our installation, Gabe and I were talking about it. Some Masons don't think it should be open, some do. When it comes to funerals, we all agree that's a public ceremony and should be shared. And it is. I think it is hands down the most beautiful. I love the installation ceremony, but
yeah, if there's anything that shows what we stand for as Freemasons, I think it's what we say and what we do during that funeral ceremony.
Yeah.
True that.
So, one of the things that I've been thinking this episode has been very humbling too, and we talked about that earlier. What helps you learn and keep your virtue, build your virtues and keep your vices in check, and it's humility, and education and contemplation. And one of the things that I find that is just incredibly powerful about this subject is death and learning how to deal with it and thinking about it constantly. So I would urge our listeners to think about death a lot and think about the 7 corporal works of mercy, which I've mentioned it before, but the corporal works of mercy are to feed the hungry, to give water to the thirsty, to clothe the naked, to shelter the homeless, to visit the sick, to visit the imprisoned or ransom the captive, and finally, to bury the dead. Burying the dead is one of the most important things we can do as Masons, and I encourage you to go to as many funerals as you can. It's important, and it makes a real difference, not just for the family, but also for you. You'll learn a lot. This is the conclusion to our podcast. If you want to learn more about Fort Worth Lodge, you can reach us at www.fortworth148.org. You can find us at Fort Worth Lodge 148 on Facebook. Our email is info148@fortworth148.org. If you live in the 64th District of the Grand Lodge of Texas and you want to promote an event, please reach out to them at 64th.org. That's 64th.org. You can learn more about our event, Texas Masonicon, at www.texasmasonicon.com. That's texasmasonicon.com. We are at Texas Masonicon on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The event is happening on September 15th, and you can pre-order tickets for $45 until August 15th when they go to the door price of $55. It's going to be an incredible educational event. We're going to have 6 breakout speakers and 3 keynote speakers. You can learn more on the website, but they're all incredible speakers.
All right, gentlemen, y'all ready to wrap this thing up?
Sure thing.
Yep.
All righty, this is Rip Moore signing off.
This is Billy Hamilton signing off.
And this is Gabe Yanakush signing off.